then introduce into that equation complex harm that the system was never designed to contend with: sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, online perpetrated gang-associated sexual harm. No wonder you're tired, folks. The system wasn't designed for the purpose you now need to make it do. And it's because of passion and hard work and dedication and creativity. That's the only way we're going to make it work. I suppose you all know this and not each other here. No. We cannot wait for the centre or the government or a randomised controlled trial, something like that, to come down from on high and tell us all what to do. Leadership is happening locally. This is where creativity and innovation and flexibility are best evidence. No one here is tired, sorry. I think we do need to make a really, really clear case for change. Adolescent harm, as I've said, is quite distinct. I also think we need to acknowledge that harm and its effects doesn't stop at 18. We again have a system designed to treat you as a child until you're 18 and an adult thereafter, unless you have a very particular type of need categorised within the legislative framework, and then more on that in a minute. We also have, I think, a very strong economic case we can make. We know that by not addressing needs effectively in adolescence, we store up needs in early adulthood. And in a minute, I'll have a little rant about the demarcation between adult safeguarding needs and children's safeguarding needs, because that would be fun, wouldn't it? And you have this absolute cliff edge in terms of funding, in terms of protectiveness, actually. That's interesting. The cliff edge for statutory support kicks in at 18, except for some specific groups like disabilities or areas. If you like, the cliff edge for when we stop feeling protected of you is more like 11. Scary thought. It's a really shocking research I'm sharing at the moment. So there is a really clear case to be made for change, and local areas have been changing. The innovation around adolescent and young adult safeguarding, I think, has been a sight to behold in recent years. This sort of perverse notion where, I suppose, to put it really bluntly, I've been told that can be controversial. I can deal with, oh, you've got a camera. Assessing where the tightrope is. I think it would be fair to say that we haven't designed a system which is fluid and developmental in its understanding of people. I would argue respectfully, it's what the camera see there, I would argue respectfully that we've designed a system which is pretty good at rescuing babies from their families, and we've increasingly got a system which is not our fad at making safeguarding personal, at putting adults in the centre, giving them choice and control, and having complex, nuanced notions of things like risk enablement. Nothing about you without you, and all that. And what we haven't got is a middle school. We haven't got something that kicks in for contextual environmental harms beyond the familial, honours your agency and independence, sees you as having both capacity and lacking capacity, because the law's a blunt instrument, isn't it? And then can follow you through your life course. What this can mean in terms of what we've designed is that we've got some real perversities in the system. So, what were the examples that I had on the version of this that had words? You can have a young, let's say you've got a young man with learning difficulties. And it's been very, very clear to all of us who've worked with him over the years that he struggles making decisions, he can struggle judging people. He's quite often been found getting wound up and left to take the telling off in the school. You know that he's impressionable. And it's not actually much of a surprise when you understand that he's becoming criminally exploited. And that gets more and more serious. But then by the time he's 18, he will be treated as an adult criminal, because he's got a learning difficulty and not a learning disability, even though anyone working in this field knows that that's not a binary judgment to make. You can have two siblings, both who've grown up with exactly the same family environment, same levels of harm, same trauma. By dint of the Spurious system, one enters care, one remains subject to a child protection plan. Not unusual. At the point at which they're experiencing, or you're concerned they're experiencing exploitation, one will be entitled to a statutory safeguarding response beyond the age of 18, if they're in care, and one may not. Same upbringing, same trauma, same experiences. It's kind of perverse when you look at it like this. We had doing some work around transitions, and a young woman explained it, and I'm going to not quote her exactly because she was a bit sweary. But she basically said, and she'd been in care for quite a long time, oh yeah, you loved me because when I was in care, I was chairing this, that and the other for you, wasn't I? I was one of your good examples. Got me on the radio and stuff, didn't you? But I'm really lonely now. No one thinks that's a safeguarding issue. Transition support, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but she's got us banged right. Transition support, 6 cookery lessons. That's what you tried to give me. My mum's Jamaican. Do you think I need cookery lessons? What I need, and I will really try and check my language here, what I need is for someone to help me spot a Wally before I'm already sharing a bed with him. Yeah, we actually don't do a very good job of that when it comes to transition support, and we don't think that loneliness is a safeguarding issue until you're an older person, and then we're very good at recognising that loneliness is a safeguarding issue. But for our 18 to 25-year-olds, we're not terribly good at it. And what this young woman went on to say, and I think she couldn't be more on point, it doesn't matter how sad I get or how mad I get, it's not until I'm bad at being a mum that I'll see you lot again. You lot being social services, in her words. She's absolutely right, of course. She's absolutely right. And you can't unhear that, can you? When it's so stark to you, the perversity within the system. You know, it's developed over the years for all sorts of very intuitive reasons, funding and different legislation and so on and so forth. But you lot are all in it because you care about people and change. And you can't be confronted with that kind of adversity and not want to kick against it, not want to innovate. If we design the system from scratch, we would argue that RIP and RIPFA, which is like RIP for adults. I'll send you a wordy version of these slides afterwards, if you like, if that's better content. Designed from scratch, we would say you need a system which is contextual, and that's drawing on people like Carleen Furman's work at University of Bedfordshire. She's led to the concept of contextual safeguarding, and put bluntly, it means the context is where the harm happens, and that might be a bus stop, might be a school, might be online, might be in your community or shopping centre, corridors, parks, rather than intrafamilial being only focus. It needs to be transitional, something that can move and shift and ratchet up a degree of agency and independence over time. Highly, highly participative, as you can see, person-centred on the bottom there, and relational. You are in a relational business, not a transactional business, fundamentally. You know, projects are important and programs are important, and thresholds sadly do still matter, and of course funding is key, and record keeping and all that stuff, otherwise they'll never invite back again. But it's people that change lives, and you know that, and you give of yourself. This is a hugely emotionally and intellectually demanding role that each of you are in, and I think we need to name that much more explicitly. It's a relational gig we're engaged in, not a transactional one. And we haven't designed a system that makes that very easy, I would argue. In terms of contextual safeguarding, I cannot encourage you enough to look at the work of Carleen Furman. When you think about where harm happens for children and for young adults, it's very much about their context, not only their family. That link at the bottom there, it's free, you can sign up, you get loads of her stuff. I'm not on commission, it's free to you. That's a genuine endorsement. I think her work's really interesting. I think it's the future of adolescent safeguarding, the contextual safeguarding network. What we tend to do in our work, of course, in traditional children's safeguarding, is we focus on the home. You know, what we tend to see with adolescents, particularly with things like sexual harm and criminal exploitation, is a high proportion of domestic abuse, abuse of siblings, neglect, and parental capacity being undermined by those that are seeking to exploit children. So it is not appropriate, as we do in traditional child protection practice, to focus only on the parental capacity to change. Can you get good enough in time for your child, madam? Because that doesn't work. Because actually what might, in this case, be happening is she's up every single night of the week, worried, sick, unable to keep her child safe because her capacity to parent has been so thoroughly undermined by peers in the neighbourhood, children in school, grown adults who are deliberately and deceitfully seeking to exploit. It's a very, very different kettle of fish we're talking about. And of course then in relation to adults, young adults coming through this, when you've had peer associations which have been exploitative, when your capacity to make safe decisions for yourself has been undermined, but you are not legally considered to lack capacity, well, you can see a real perfect storm there. When someone has, throughout their different contexts, through school, in their neighbourhoods, experienced a variety of things which undermine their, I guess, their agency. Because being exploited sexually, criminally, financially, undermines your sense of agency, your sense of self. It's then quite tricky to enter an adult safeguarding environment where, well, I guess if she doesn't consent, there's not much we can do, is there? She doesn't lack capacity in the eyes of the law. And that, I think, can be really tricky. Now, there are many parts of the country that are bucking that trend, that are trying to work very, very creatively. I wouldn't be at all surprised to know that Shropshire was one of them. But it is a very, very live tension that people encounter again and again. This notion of I get the binary notion that if you're under 18, you definitely don't have any capacity, and we have to do to you, do for you, and protect you from harm. And then over 18, you are absolutely considered to have capacity unless we can demonstrably prove otherwise, and you are largely considered to be entirely an agent of safeguarding. And that works, I would say, unless you understand the mechanics of exploitation, which is about stripping away your sense of agency, subtly coercing over time, diluting your capacity in very, very nuanced ways. And then, of course, we can get into this really sticky territory where our efforts to help can compound that loss of agency. You know, the kids we've sent to go and live in Snowdonia because we've run out of options. I grew up near Snowdonia. It's definitely punitive, not restorative, I can assure you. I mean, how you send a kid somewhere where there's no signal and pretend that's therapeutic? I don't know. You know, adults who, having been told we're very worried that you're being coerced, are going to put you to live somewhere else. You know, we can actually get involved in behaviours which are themselves compounding that sense of coercion, and that's, I think, a very tricky issue for professionals to deal with. You might be aware of the work Greater Manchester Authority, their complex safeguarding agenda. Have you clocked that? It's quite interesting, messy. They have, I think very sensibly, elected to kind of redo their whole structure really around safeguarding. So complex safeguarding is that they've actually written the definition for me. They are particularly focusing on criminal activity which is often organised or behaviour associated to criminality involving often vulnerable children where there is exploitation and or a clear or implied safeguarding concern. What they mean is CSE, CC, modern slavery, trafficking, and so on and so forth. That's stuff that has a criminality and an exploitative element. And they are, I think, broadly sensibly, really seeking to try and bring those different kinds of considerations together. Often they think the mechanisms underneath them are very similar for young people. They're often the same young people, of course. They very much tend to become the same group of young adults that people are concerned about. There's a question mark for them around whether things like honour-based violence, worst named in history, I think, whether FGM fits with that. I would argue not very neatly. And there's an ongoing debate around whether radicalisation can be seen in the same way. Personally, I think we'd be very cautious on that. The research is nowhere near ready, and you would be very politically naive to assume that all radicalisation is definitely exploitation. You know, one person's radicalisation, another person's political protest. So we need to stay a bit nuanced and savvy there, I suggest. But it's an interesting idea, isn't it? There's a basket of safeguarding issues which are better understood by naming their complexity and deliberately trying to bring them together. There's some interesting work well worth following in the Greater Manchester. You can see this. You can see the need for. I sometimes tease calling Greater Manchester it's the file under too difficult box. But actually, we do need a too difficult box. Because when you think about how child protection has historically operated, there's a really awkward fit with adolescents. And it gets more awkward the older they get and the more complex their harm is. So, you know, by and large, we pretty much know what to do, don't we, with a little one living in a house with domestic abuse, give or take. We know which wheels to turn, don't we? We're much, much more challenged by the 16-year-old girl who beats her mum up, having lived with domestic abuse for 2 years. We, by and large, know what to do when a young child is sexually abused within their family context. We are much, much more challenged by the 13-year-old boy who rapes a 17-year-old girl being filmed by his 15-year-old mate as part of their gang initiation. We don't have a coherent national response to that. We have some local areas doing really, really important and thoughtful work, but you are largely having to make judgments in this area in a way that you haven't even been allowed to make judgments in other areas, which I think is interesting. There's a whole host of behaviours and practices that the centre really directs how local areas operate. And I think the area of exploitation, adolescence into young adulthood, is one where local areas absolutely need to lead the debate, need to lead the discussion, because you're doing it, you're having to be flexible every single day. You're operating faster than we can publish research. It's certainly working faster than we can publish policy. And I think everything's faster than we can make new legislation at the moment, isn't it? Because we're a bit preoccupied with something, blah, blah, something's going on over there. But there's this very awkward fit around what we design a system for and what you are actually confronted by the 14, 15, 24-year-olds that you care about. And we have this really, I think, a serious policy gap between deliberately difficult language, rescuing babies from harm in the family, and making safeguarding personal. Person-led, risk enablement, choice and control, I think an increasingly rich and positive approach to safeguarding adults. And I bet you can all think of at least one 15, 16, 21-year-old who's fallen down that gap. Because we haven't designed a system which is transitional and contextual, and I would suggest also not relational. The rescue reform paradigm is worth bearing in mind here. We like to rescue littlies, we like our kids cute. In fact, we do like our child victims to look like children and look like victims, it turns out. We're quite susceptible to branding like that. There was that awful bit, wasn't there? Just that, and there's a lot of competition for awful bits in our country's recent history. There was that recent bit where children started to come over from the Dobbs Amendment, when all the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children were arriving on our shores, and our first response as a nation, with almost one voice, thanks to tabloids, he's not a child, he's got a moustache! He's got bone flap, hasn't he? He's not a kid. He's not a kid. I want vulnerable children, that's what we agreed to take. He's tall and everything. Now we've all got sons, nephews, godsons, you know, who might be built like a brick outhouse, with bum flap, full beards, and we still think they're 5 years old because they're boys we love. They're boys we can... I can think of some 30-year-old men who frankly still make me spit on a hanky and watch their faces. But they're other children, they're foreign children. They don't deserve to have moustaches. They need to arrive yay high with big eyes, looking gorgeous, looking a bit National Geographic, and critically looking grateful. That's how we know we're rescuing them. And I thought that was a really damning indictment, but also a very insightful episode in how we understand adolescents and young adults. We don't like them. We don't like them as a country. We're scared of them. They wear hoodies. They use slang we don't understand. Their drugs are all just numbers and letters no one can understand, like Rolling Stones days. We don't like them very much. We seek to reform them, not rescue them. You know, if you come across a 5-year-old lad who's been kidnapped, threatened with torture, possibly been tortured, forced to sell drugs under threat of his family dying, you rescue him. We wouldn't, in a heartbeat, we'd rescue him, you know? If you find a 15-year-old lad, or God forbid, 17-and-a-half-year-old lad, in the same circumstances, you better hope you've got a forward-thinking enough local partnership agreement and some really progressive local police forces who will ensure this child has the safeguarding response he needs. Not all parts of the country are there yet. I'm sure you are, but not everyone is. You get a 6-year-old girl who gets sexually abused, we're in there, we'll rescue her. 16-year-old girl gets sexually abused, we'll do some healthy relationships work. Now, as it happens, I'm a real fan of sex ed. I think it's critically important. I think it's a disgrace we haven't had it mandatory for the last 25 years. But what message are we sending? You've been sexually abused, and we'd like you to think about your behaviours and choices, okay? I get my lawnmower nicked. Victim support don't put me in a group, do we? And say, now then, Des, what could you have done differently to stop your lawnmower getting robbed? Shall we all talk about how Des could have had a stronger lock on the shed? It is the only offence where we seek to reform the victim rather than address the harm. Jessica Reed is very, very good. She writes fabulously about victim blaming, and you think I'm controversial, she's proper swearing. But it is a really serious point. Why are we seeking only to reform the victim's behaviours rather than address the harmful context in which they're operating? You know, on the one hand, we're saying to young women, we need to give you some education so you stop making these poor choices. On the other, we've got the BBC publishing advice from, I forget which body it was now, ladies, don't wear your headphones with you when you're walking around in case you get raped. My headphones have never raped me. Bloody nonsense. But you see this subtle victim blame that comes through again and again, never more so with our teenagers and our young adults, when they have put themselves at risk, which is just a better way, isn't it, of saying lifestyle choices. We call it risky behaviours now, and making unwise decisions. We meant lifestyle choices, that's what we were doing 10 years ago. We need to be honest about the fallibility in our thinking, our victim blaming tendencies. And we have to address that because the system has got to be relational. It is an act of love, and I use that word very deliberately. I'm very sorry to those who wish I hadn't. This is a quote from Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner was the king of the ecological perspective, you know, the Venn diagram stuff, kids in the system, senior class. Bronfenbrenner says, and I use this quote all the time, you should have me on commission, I think it's absolutely glorious. To develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults who have an irrational, emotional relationship with the child. Someone's got to be crazy about the kid. That's number one. First, last, always. Someone's got to be crazy about the kid. Far be it from me to improve on the work of Ron from Brenner, but I would suggest that it's not so much a child as a person. Developmentally, a person just needs someone to be absolutely crazy about them. I don't care if you're 21 or 29 or 18 or a care leaver, you just need someone who's got your back and absolutely loves you. Love and limits. Professor Stephen Scott, who's terrifically clever, does lots of stuff around parenting and fostering, he says kids need two things, and then he said actually adults need two things, love and limits. The rest is window dressing, really, when you think about it. And we haven't designed a system that's making it easy enough for you to love these people. And I know we need about 57 different words for love, don't we? Because there's a million different varieties, and I'm in no way suggesting it's the kind of love that you have as a parent or a partner. We need like the Inuit with all their 20 different words for snow. But in terms of the emotional intensity of the work you do, the adults and children you serve ask of you emotionally in a way that we are not acknowledging, and we need to acknowledge it. Some of you will go to bed tonight, and the last person you think of will not be related to you. Some of you woke up this morning, the first kid you worried about is not your own. I'm not saying that's okay. I'm not saying that we want dependency. It's not healthy. Process it, take supervision, be responsible. But let's name it. Let's name it for the act of love it is. And we have to be honest about what it's taking from you emotionally, otherwise we're never really going to help to keep you safe in your work and for you to keep your practitioners, your officers, your staff safe. We don't talk about attachment in adolescence, and we need to. We are absolutely obsessed with attachment in the early years, aren't we? Any early years folks in? Of course, you nod politely, you don't put your hands up. Classic early years. You're not allowed to work with little leads without understanding attachment, are you? We don't let you anywhere near them these days. You've got to understand child development, understand attachment. We'll let you loose on teenagers and adults any day of the week, often with very little understanding of attachment, even though the research is very clear. Goretti and Peled are good on this. Attachment security in adolescence does exactly the same damn thing as it does for little leads. A secure base fosters an ability to explore, develop cognitively, socially, emotionally, and yet we don't really talk about adolescent attachment. Now, David Shemmings down at Kent, his work's very interesting on this. He thinks that some children, when they've experienced prolonged maltreatment, for example, can develop disorganised attachment patterns. It's not a life sentence necessarily, it's quite rare in the population, but in terms of the work you do, you might come across it a lot more. In the general population, 40% of us are insecurely attached, no bother. And I do mean us, that I show off for a living. Of course, I'm insecurely attached. But a very small proportion of the subpopulation can have disorganised attachment patterns. Patterns, not styles, you'll notice. They'll be reductive. And David Shemmings and others suggest that might be as a result of developing an internal working model through years of maltreatment, which says, I'm discussing our work, I'm unloved, and I'm unlovable. And then you turn 18, and we really make sure you know you're unlovable. I'm afraid you don't meet threshold. I'm afraid you haven't got eligibility. You're not meeting the eligibility criteria, are you? You haven't got an identified care and support. I'm on my knees. I'm in trouble. Yes, but that's not actually what a care and support need is. But I need care and I need support. That's not really what we mean when we say care and support need in a slightly Kafkaesque move. We don't actually mean, do you need care and support? Which the answer would be, yes, we all do. We mean, do you specifically meet a threshold which is astronomically high compared to the kids we're turfing out aged 18? Prove that you're sad enough, mad enough, bad enough, and then I will be empowered to respond to you. This is not what local areas want. Local services are in it because of their values, and you're being asked to work in a constricted system, which does not have attachment at its heart. We actually sever attachment. If you're naughty, we'll change your schools. If you play up, well, it's a placement breakdown. No, it's just a scrap. Placement breakdown if you're in care, though, isn't it? You can have a fight for your son, make up by lunchtime. If you're in care and you have a fight, it's a placement breakdown. We move you out of the area. I'm afraid that young man was exploiting you so much, we're so concerned about your ability to make decisions, we're going to move you to Snowdonia. Other placements are available, commissioners. Clear on that. So you see, we're not just unaware of attachment, we actually, I would say, we weaponize attachment to some extent if we're not careful. We're watching the midterms, sorry, like the word weaponize, it's like political on that. Now, all of this becomes particularly unsettling to me, or interesting, when you consider very, very recent cutting-edge research from people like Sawyer and the Lancet this year, where they say that when you look at cognitive function and brain architecture and social trends and norms, Adolescence, it turns out, doesn't stop at 18. Adolescence needs to be redefined, the authors argue, 10 to 24. Now, two apologies. One, I'm really sorry, colleagues working in adult services who definitely want to slash my tyres at this point, I'm sure, because where do you find the extra 6 years worth of funding? I don't drive deliberately, so you can't slash my tyres. And secondly, I'm really sorry if you've got a 23-and-a-half-year-old child still living in your house and I've just legitimised it. And science does back them to some extent, I'm afraid. But that's really important, isn't it? We are treating you as if you have entered adulthood, as if it's an event. It's not, of course, it's a process. And it's definitely not happening on their 18th birthday. And we need to be upfront about that and be honest about it. You do not need us less because you had your 18th birthday. What we need is a system which is fluid, where we can ratchet up and down support, we can ratchet up and down the degree of independence and agency you have, we can respond to your context, your personal strengths, your networks, your fears, your hopes, and so on. And if this sounds a bit idealistic, I make no apology for that. The whole sector runs on ideals. God knows it's not the pensions anymore, is it? You're in this because you still have ideals about people, and you have dreams for them. So yeah, I don't apologise for that. We do need to consider the learning here from neuroscience. As I say, Sawyer's work I think is really, really important. Not a real brain, don't put it in an essay or anything. And be a bit careful with the neuroscience, okay, because it's not policy ready. I understand that neuroscientists are slightly horrified what we're doing with their research in the children's sector, because we're being a bit blunt with it, aren't we? Kind of go, well, I've seen a brain scan where one of them's all small and got no green light around it, and that proves that no child can stay in a neglected household more than 4 days. We're done with it. And of course, that's not what the research says. We don't need a brain scan to tell us abuse is bad. We also definitely don't need language like hardwired. The first 1,001 days are very important, aren't they? Early years college is critically important, but there is no hardwiring that happens on your 4th birthday. That is an absolute nonsense. There's no hardwiring in the brain, and that brain plasticity, that mushy mouldiness that happens in early years, which is why it's such an important time to get all the right stuff in place, that brain plasticity happens again in adolescence, and possibly, the jury's out this, might happen again in early adulthood. So if you're looking at your child and think his brain's turned to mush, you are evidentially correct. That squishiness happens at points throughout our lives. So yes, absolutely invest in the early years, but do not please fall into the trap of thinking neuroscience tells us they get hardwired wrong, they get irreparably damaged. It's simply not backed up by the evidence. If you're particularly interested in this, get Corridor Donna to contact me and I'll send you some links. I don't want to do too much now. One of the things I do think is important is understanding how a bit of the brain, I guess, neurobiology can affect our behaviours, which we then ascribe to risk-taking. So a good example would be the dopamine, dopamine being the happy hormone, again, but really, really grossly simply, exercise apparently, posh dark chocolate, not a wagon wheel, like fancy chocolate, and a roll in the hay, I'm told. All of these things will boost your dopamine, which is nice, isn't it? We've got, I don't know, 0.2 micrograms between us probably, and that's only because someone gave me free coffee this morning. Teenagers are awash with the damn stuff, huge peaks and troughs of dopamine. And some researchers, Romer's a good example, R-O-M-E-R, reckon that this might, in part, explain the impulsivity of adolescents and young adults, the experiment with drugs, talking, without owner's consent, driving the wrong way down a dual carriageway, memorably, not me, the child I worked with. And actually that's quite important, not to excuse bad behaviour, but to help us think about what might be underpinning this risky behaviour, the thrill of feeling your own mortality. And our response sometimes as a system is to come and do a worksheet on dangerous driving, which doesn't quite meet with my developmental needs. It's not quite a response that goes with the grain of my development. Does that make sense? So think about the adolescent brain, and remembering the adolescent brain doesn't stop at 18, it's a process that extends right up into our mid-20s. We can design services and approaches which are much more attuned to those developmental needs. We urgently need to rethink issues of choice and risk-taking behaviours. Our language is harmful. We're using choice, I would suggest, probably as shorthand, because we're not necessarily engaging the fact that risk and harm, there's some really complex biological, social, neurobiological, contextual factors, all interacting in very nuanced ways And that exacerbates or de-escalates the risk and harm that we might be encountering. But when we don't engage with that, we get into, there's basically the deserving and the undeserving. There's nice children we can rescue, there's good adults who are trying their best and we're there to support them. And then there's the troublesome ones who just, they persist in putting themselves at risk. They just keep putting themselves at risk, you know how the world works like that, completely individualised. So we use choice, for example, when we mean adaptation to harm. So a good example might be 19-year-old lad, having grown up with domestic abuse all his life, has developed, as research suggests he might, hypervigilance. The world is very, very dangerous, because it was for him. He's more likely to be attracted into groups and gangs for their perceived protective benefit. The world's dead scary, and those fellas that nails hard, I want to hang out with them. That is a very solid logic model, actually. That's a very sensible self-preservation strategy. Now, I'm not suggesting the first thing you can possibly say when you nick a kid is, do tell me about your attachment experiences. And I know, I'm not so naive, I think that could be how it works. But that young man, who is now, of course, being treated as a criminal, rightly or wrongly, that's a different workshop, isn't it? What we have tended to write down, and put on record, is chooses to engage with negative and offending peers. Chooses to take a criminal path in life. And actually, it is a pretty solid adaptation to harm. Sometimes we call it a choice when it's a maladaptation to harm. So a young child has been sexually abused by someone in a caring position. Betrayal trauma theorists would suggest that one of the things we do to cope with that is we move our goalposts. I need to keep loving you, but I know on some level this isn't all right. So I need to reaccommodate what constitutes love. Make sense? Well, of course, by the time I'm 14, 15, or younger, I'm that much more vulnerable to the strategies of perpetrators who would seek to exploit my distorted sense of what constitutes love. Does that make sense? Not quite the same as, sadly, chooses to engage in risky behaviours. And that is still what we're writing down now. You can always see the tippet where we used to write lifestyle choices, and now we're saying risky behaviours. It's not that much better, is it? We're still locating all responsibility in the victim. And that's a problem. Sometimes, of course, we're calling it a choice when it's actually a young person trying to meet their unmet needs. The kid who's grown up in neglect for many, many years, perhaps following David Shemming's train of thought, has developed an internal working model that says, I'm disgusting, I'm worthless, I'm unloved, I'm ugly, I'm stupid, I'm unlovable. That's the kicker, isn't it? I'm unlovable. And then your man rocks up in a really nice set of wheels, proper tidy sound system, drop-down chassis, blue light underneath it, captures my eye, and yours, I can see. Gets my nails done. Every 2 weeks, 25 quid. That's actually quite a big deal. That's quite a statement about how much I matter. Gets me some new clothes. Buys me some food. I mean, I never ask for food because I don't really like to see, I don't want him to see me eating, but I take it back to my brothers and sisters. Tells me I'm gorgeous. Tells me I'm so hot that he'd like to bring his mates next time. In fact, can he film it? Who's crazy about me? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like he is. And I don't feel rescued when one of you folks rocks up, explains I've been groomed. I don't feel grateful. I'm certainly not a good child victim. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm kicking off, I'm kicking back. He was meeting, I thought, a need in me, or I was seeking to meet a need in me. Not quite the same as chooses to return to her abusive partner despite the best efforts of professionals in a serious case review just last year. We have not evolved as much as we like to think from victim blaming and lifestyle choices type language. And that really plays out as you enter adulthood when, magically, overnight, at 18, you are completely responsible for all of your behaviours unless we can medically prove otherwise. It simply doesn't take into account human behaviour and development. Does that make sense? You follow me? You're allowed to heckle if you like as well. I'm out of here straight after in a taxi, so you can definitely risk offending. This notion of professional perception of adolescence is important. Rita Rees and Mike Stevens do fantastic work in this area. These are, I think, a really heartbreaking expression. They talk about adolescents being imperfect victims. They're not cute, they're not grateful, they don't say thank you, they tell you F off sometimes, don't they? That might have just been my own practice. Perhaps you not only ever get lovely manners from the kids you serve. What Rees and others showed is that when young people aged between 11 up They're more likely to be held responsible for the harm they face. They're less likely to be referred to children's social care by other partners. They're more likely to be considered in some way responsible for the circumstances they're in, and they're less likely to receive a protective response. And you can double that when they're boys, and especially when they're black. And that is such a damning indictment on our professionalism, but we need to have this difficult conversation about what our understanding of adolescents and young adults is, who the good victims are. We need to have a really difficult soul-searching conversation, I think, as a whole sector, as a partnership like this. We can't just put a new strategy in or roll out some new training. We need to get right down to the brass tacks of why we don't love these kids sometimes, or rather, that's not true, why as a society we don't love these kids and young adults, and that's why we need you lot to do it. That's why we rely so much on you as a professional group. You love them because we don't, as a nation, I guess. We really need you to hold on to that. If you don't know the kids and adults you serve, you can never make a sensible assessment of their vulnerability. Now that sounds very obvious, of course, and managers in the room, you will absolutely understand this, that finding enough time for your practitioners, your officers, your staff to know people is one of the biggest challenges you face. If we don't know the people we serve, we rely on spurious things like choices, or even scarier, we use those really blunt, silly checklists that don't allow any professional judgment and are sometimes completely not based on evidence. CSE in particular suffers from this. There's been a proliferation of those scorecard indicators. See the work of Sarah Brown at Coventry University. She's very, very clear on this. There are only 3 well-evidenced factors which might indicate a later sexual harm: previous sexual abuse, being disabled, being in care. Makeup, keeping secrets, blah, blah, spurious stuff. We need much more deep thinking there. There is not a computer plug-in in the world, nor a checklist, nor a toolkit, nor an assessment framework that can take the place of evidence-informed, person-centred, relational, critically thought-through professional judgment. You are the most important person in these people's lives. Do not let the machines get away from you, because that's what drives victim blaming. And if we get into victim blaming, if we locate responsibility with the individual, what we're doing ultimately is harming their resilience. We're not allowing them to exercise control. We're not allowing them to bounce back. We give them a narrative which is damaging. We're sometimes blaming them, and we're not allowing them to be part of the solution. And the name of the game has surely got to be about resilience, not just rest. Resilience promotion. We're not here only to protect kids, but we're also trying to prepare them into adulthood. And that's why the notion of participation is so important. I very rarely quote Jeremy Hunt, but I do think that, I'm so glad I said that right on camera. I do think that a good tenet for our work with adolescents and young adults is nothing about you without you. We have to allow these young people, these young adults, to exercise some control in their lives if we're going to undo the harm that they've experienced through exploitation. If we don't, something very scary happens. We actually mirror abusive dynamics. This quote, this young man, I think sums up really well. I was in care all my life, and you did keep me really safe. You wrapped me up tight in bubble wrap, but I'm 19 now, and I kind of feel like I can't move my arms. We have not prepared that young man. We've protected him, but we have in no way prepared him for adulthood. And we have to shift our thinking into one which is about preparedness. We have to not mirror the same coercive, abusive dynamics that we're there to disrupt. Sending a kid to Snowdonia doesn't feel necessarily much different to them than being locked in the house we busted. We need to be really honest and have some really tough conversations about the way in which we might be engaging in iatrogenic harm. Colleagues in health will know iatrogenic means the medicine makes you poorly or the treatment makes you worse. I think we need a word like iatrogenic for our social care, for our policing, for our wider community services. We are sometimes inadvertently exacerbating harm. And that is a really tough place to reflect on. I do think Shropshire is an area where you guys have the capacity, the courage, the creativity to do this, and there are other parts of the country that are relying on you to keep moving forward, so they can learn from you. So do hold your heads up high, no pressure. We are sort of relying on people like you because we know you're good and we know you can get there. But please, please do, to quote that very famous researcher, Jerry Springer, do take care of yourselves and each other in this work. It's tough stuff. Thanks for having me.